my phone up for this one because it's a very, very serious topic. It's so good to be here with you both. Baroness May, let me start with you. Talk to us a little bit about what modern slavery is and how you got involved with this.
Well, certainly. Well, I mean, modern slavery is what the term suggests. I mean, most people would think that slavery was abolished hundreds of years ago, but it wasn't. It is with us today. It is in every country in the world. It is when somebody's freedom is taken away from them, when they are exploited, when they are forced to work, to undo things, when they can't get away. They're perhaps working in a factory, in a supply chain, but they're not being paid properly. They have no freedom for themselves. It is slavery in every sense of the term. It exists in many forms today. I got interested in the issue looking particularly at violence against women and girls because the majority of people enslaved are women and girls across the world. 50 million people across the world may be an underestimate. So I got involved through that. But then I began to realize that actually this is, I think, the greatest human rights issue of our day.
John, I think maybe some people in this room would see Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and they're like, why is this guy John on stage here talking about this? I mean, how did you come across this issue and how does it impact a business like HPE?
Well, I came across it through our supply chain work and really looking at what's happening in the creation of our products from mineral extraction all the way up through manufacturing. And as you start to look deeper, you realize, as Baroness May has said, and she's doing phenomenal work with the Global Commission, this really is the human rights issue of our time. And a few years ago, the UN issued a challenge to eradicate slavery by 2030. And as we sit here at 2025, we're headed in the wrong direction. We're headed in the wrong direction for lots of reasons, because corporations don't necessarily see it that way and don't understand necessarily how far they need to go, but also because we have kind of a misconception around what we're talking about. People generally think of forced labor in spaces like, garment industry, seafood, et cetera. But, take a recent case in the UK. There were dozens of people trafficked in by an Eastern European gang to work at a McDonald's, lived in the same house, and the gang collected all of their paychecks and put it into a single bank account for their benefit over the span of years. A McDonald's. Did any of you think that the people who were taking your French fry order might be in forced labor? But that's how obvious it is on one level and how hidden from sight it is on another level. And so as I dug into the issue, first looking at our own supply chain, then meeting people like Baroness May and others, you realize this is the human rights issue of our time, and we need to go address it.
Baroness, how could regulators help work alongside companies to suss out problems like this?
Well, the first thing that regulators can do is have decent legislation to address this issue and comprehensive legislation to address it. And the Global Commission on Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking, which I chair, published a report, launched it at the UN in April, which recommends precisely that to countries, that they've got to make sure they've got really comprehensive modern slavery legislation. But in relation to companies, the key thing is to make sure that companies are looking, as John has said, at their supply chains. And not just at, if you like, the first level of supply chain, but all the way down. So maybe that garment factory, you might look at that garment factory where the clothes are being made, but how is the cotton produced? You've got to look at the whole of the supply chain. So one of our recommendations is that countries should mandate, the term is human rights due diligence, but basically mandate that companies need to look at their supply chains. They need to investigate, and not just investigate, but act when you find it. That's absolutely critical. And companies could transform the lives of so many people around the world.
John, big companies are dealing with so many challenges. It's tariffs, the political climate is supercharged. Where should this fall in that hierarchy of priorities in the C-suite?
I think at the very top. And I think that's been a challenge because, as you've indicated, there are a lot of issues that are demanding the attention. And even on the risk and let's call it ESG side, which is now, in some worlds, not a favored discussion, so many other issues had crowded out this issue. I think partly because people really don't know the extent to which it's happening. And as we said, we think 50 million people enslaved today is vastly understating it, but we also know that the trend is headed in the wrong direction. So in part, with efforts of the Global Commission and others, we do need to get this issue to the top of the C-suite and to the top of the board of directors to understand this is a key risk. It's not just a reputational risk. At the end of the day, it's a cost risk. As a company, you aren't really engaged in the right activity, and you're really not dealing with the right costs if you've got slave labor in your supply chain. You need to understand it's not just a human rights issue, it's a business issue. And I think that's the task in front of us, is really getting it to the C-suite level so we can get the right level of engagement.
How do you track this initiative inside of a company, HPE?
So we've got an entire team that's focused on this. We've got a team that's focused on our supply chain and the technologies we can use there. But B, this is an area that we've been passionate about for a long time. I'm proud to say we are a 2-time winner of the Stop Slavery Award. And so we're looking to be a thought leader here. And so we've partnered with the World Economic Forum on what we're calling the Global Data Partnership, because our view right now is many problems can be solved by better data and better sharing of data to draw intelligence. We have a lot of organizations right now that are engaged in some form of the fight in modern slavery. But the reality is they operate in silos, doing the best they can with what they have. We believe that if we can democratize the data between folks who are engaged in supporting survivors to governmental organizations that are dealing with immigration issues, to businesses that have supply chains, if we can democratize that data, each group in that chain can be more effective and we can go attack it. So at HPE, number one, we got to make sure we're taking care of our own house and are focused on our own supply chain and our own practices. But number two, we're working with many others and supporting the Global Commission in making sure that we're bringing solutions out there that might be able to help us be more effective in this fight.
Baroness, you championed the UK's Modern Slavery Act. Really, it was a pioneering piece of legislation. When you look back, what do you think the biggest impact has been?
I think the biggest impact of the Modern Slavery Act was just, first of all, just to raise awareness of this as an issue, to make sure that people understood that this was happening in our towns, in our cities, in our villages. Probably, close to where most people in the UK are, there'll be somebody in some form of slavery, be it the McDonald's that John referenced, be it somebody in domestic servitude, in sexual exploitation, in the agriculture sector, in the fishing industry. It is with us today. So I think raising awareness was the key thing. We need to go back to the Modern Slavery Act and ensure that we've got the right legislation there for companies, for their supply chains, requiring companies not just to report on whether they've had a look or not at their supply chain, but actually to show what they've done and to show that they've acted when they've found it. But the legislation has to be comprehensive. It has to deal with victim support. It has to deal with law enforcement, as well as dealing with issues like business supply chains.
As you look around the world, are there certain countries that stick out as really bad actors as it pertains to modern slavery?
Well, there's an organisation called Walk Free which works with the ILO to produce a global slavery index, and they identify for every country the propensity for slavery to take place and the number of people enslaved. But I don't think we should think of countries in quite the way in which you've described it, because it is everywhere. It's here in the USA, it's in the UK, and you see new forms of slavery developing. So one new form of slavery is particularly in East Asia, where IT professionals are lured into what appear to be good IT jobs, and they end up in a data center in Myanmar, passports taken away, not being properly paid, forced to conduct criminal scams. So, and this is a new thing that the criminal gangs have created, this new form of slavery today.
It's a great example the Baroness May just gave, and the McDonald's one is another good example. But here's one that also comes up and maybe hits even closer to home. Nail salons in the US. Cases in which people have been trafficked in to work in nail salons, and there's an individual who walks the floor at all times, making sure that the people who are working there are doing what they're supposed to do. They all get loaded in a van at the end of the day. They're all taken back to a single home, and essentially all that revenue is going to the owner of the business, right? So yes, it happens, in Asia in the electronics business, or it may happen, in the Philippines in the seafood business, but it happens in the U.S., whether it's happening in a nail salon, or it's happening in a laundry, or it's happening in agriculture. Forced labor is happening everywhere in the world, and that's why we say it's the human rights issue of our time, and yet somehow, until recently, it seems to have kind of fallen off the radar screen.
What would you like to see from regulators?
Well, I think the due diligence piece is a really helpful piece, but at the same time, I don't think name and shame is the right way to solve the problem, right? You need to create a structure in which folks who are actually looking and finding things don't view that as a punishment then with a fine or something else, in which they say, well, why bother to go look? Because we know that the most responsible and respectable companies, they'll go look regardless. But you need to get beyond that, and if folks believe that they're going to get punished for that, that's going to be the problem. I believe, and we say this in our own sort of promotional materials, if you don't think you have slavery in your supply chain, you're not looking far enough, you're not looking hard enough. We got to incent people to continue to go further and almost reward people for finding it and eradicating it versus the name and shame game. So government has a role to play in sort of pushing people in that direction, but we got to make sure that when people go do that, that it doesn't turn into a penalty system whereby you're almost disincenting people from going and looking. That's very difficult. It's very counterintuitive to what we usually do, but I think we've got to marry those two things up if we're going to be successful.
And critical, I imagine, to get success on this initiative, Baroness, is you have to have global support. It can't just be one country trying to rid the system of this.
Well, that's right, and that's why I set up the Global Commission. And we have commissioners from around the world, but it's that sense that no single country is going to solve this issue. No single government's going to solve it. No single business is going to solve it. We've all got to work together. And so countries have to look at what's happening inside their borders. They also have to work with other states in relation to people being trafficked across borders. But one of the things that governments need to realise is that this issue of slavery is mixed in with other issues that they're addressing. So mass migration, mass displacement of people leads to increased vulnerability to being trafficked and being enslaved. Climate change, where it affects, say, the agriculture in a village, means, sadly, the parents might be more willing to let their daughter go when somebody comes into the village and says, we can give her a better life, when in fact they're being taken into domestic servitude or sexual exploitation. So all of these issues are intertwined, and one of the pieces of work that we've started at the Commission is actually looking at the economics of all of this. The impact on governments, yes, but there's an economic aspect in relation to companies. And I've met people from companies who've actually taken action and said it wasn't just about it being a human rights issue, it actually helped us because productivity went up. We had a better, more satisfied workforce because they had the right conditions and they weren't being enslaved.
If I may, just a quick plug for the Global Commission. When you think about the climate issue, right, you have an entire scientific community that's driving the narrative and can keep the issue alive and provide more and more data and kind of create that discourse. One of the challenges has been in the modern slavery world, there really isn't an organization playing that role. It is very fragmented. And as a result, being able to drive the narrative and actually get some level of concerted effort has been missing. And so the Global Commission that Baroness May is leading is really playing that role. And if you're not familiar with their work, the report they issued here at the UN just a few months ago, I invite you to take a look at their report and take a look at their work and think about whether there's a way for you to support it, because they really are playing that quarterbacking role and really bringing this issue back to the fore, which is critical to solving it.
John, before I take some questions from the audience, for the past 2 years of my life, I've heard AI is changing the world. We're getting agents taking over companies. What role does AI play in solving this issue? and how are you doing it at HP?
So there's huge potential here. And as I mentioned, our focus is on what we're calling the Global Data Partnership, which we launched together with the World Economic Forum. We're actually talking, the forum and HP are talking about later today. We believe if we can democratize data and make it available to folks in all different parts of this fight against modern slavery, and then we can bring AI on top of it to form better insights, whether you're in the rescue, if you're in the survivor support, whether you're in the supply chain world, whether you're in the government world. We believe that the power of AI and the power of data right now is we can have better insights and better actions. So it's a huge opportunity. Only an area of caution is, as we've seen with every technology, there's tremendous upside and there is tremendous downside. And AI will be used to exploit people in the future. It's happening right now in all different ways. So we've got to be conscious of the downsides that AI can play in the continued exploitation of the most vulnerable people on the globe.
And I got some good questions from the audience here. Baroness May, let me start with you here. What role can grassroots movements play in tackling modern slavery across global supply chains?
Well, grassroots movements are important to help actually identify what is happening in those supply chains. One of the problems often is being able to get into a company where there is forced labour in order to be able to identify it. And sometimes these people who are enslaving people are very clever at manipulating their figures, manipulating their reports, so that it's difficult to identify. At grassroots, people can often actually just get in, know what's happening, find out what's happening, and can be the reporting mechanism. Whereas the people who are enslaved in that company don't feel able to blow the whistle because there'll be retaliation. And they worry about what's going to happen to them, what's going to happen to their fellow workers, what's going to happen to their family. So actually grassroots movements can play a very important role there.
John, this one another good one. How has the rise of remote work changed the risks of modern slavery?
Well, I think, frankly, remote work is sort of a European kind of luxury. I mean, many of the places we're talking about here, it's not about remote work. I do think that the risk is it allows more and more people to feel detached from what it is that's happening inside the business. You know, if you're sitting in a company like Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and you're sitting in your home office, you have no real sense of what's actually happening downstream, whether that's minerals extraction, whether that's the manufacture of the product, whether it's how are the products handled at their end of life. And is there slavery downstream after you've sold the product, but someone is looking to do recapture? So I don't think it's changing it from the perspective of the people being enslaved, but I do worry that it allows us all to become yet another level detached from what we do, and therefore don't feel the human element of what our activities are actually causing.
Baroness, last question for you here. For those in the room or watching where this is playing, how could they get involved today to help?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is for people here to actually go back to their businesses and say, we need to do something about this. And if you look at the Global Commission's report, the title was No Country is Immune. Within that, there was a piece of work on supply chains which sets out at a top level what companies should do in order to be able to look into their supply chains. So I think that's the first thing to do. And the second thing actually is to keep eyes and ears open. You know, there will be people here, I can see in the audience, who may use those nail salons, those nail bars, as we would call them in the UK. Car washes is another place in the UK where very often people are in slavery. I remember the story of a woman in the UK who went to a talk about modern slavery. And she thought to herself, there was a parade of shops in her local town, and with rooms above the shops, and the curtains were always drawn. And she'd always just wondered about this. And she went to the police and she spoke to them about this, and the police raided them, and there were people who were in forced labour living in those rooms in terrible conditions. And that's the thing. Freedom's taken away, forced to exploited for the benefit of others, and often living in the most appalling conditions, without proper food, without proper sanitation, without pay. It's slavery today.
I thank you both for being here and really discussing an important topic that I think a lot of people don't really know much about. John Schultz, Executive Vice President and COO of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and Baroness Theresa May. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.